Something that will set your video game project from hobby to professional looking is the little things. One such example is game settings. In Unreal Engine 4, by using a combination of blueprints, console commands, and UMG GUIs, plus some logic, we can create a full-fledged game settings system for audio, video, and even customize it to our own game. This series will go over creating such a system. Let me first start by quickly introducing myself. Insomnia from Unreal Tech, division of Blender Tech, and welcome to the first video in the Game Settings for Unreal Engine 4 project series. At the end of this course, you should be able to take away a bigger knowledge of blueprints and how they can be used in more creative ways, learn more about certain systems such as audio, learn about widget switchers and more UMG user interface elements, as well as much more, hopefully. With that said, let's start a new first-person project, or you can apply this all to one you've already started. We're working in 4.8.1, so with that done, remember our motto, create your way, and let's get to it. So, getting started with any new project, I always recommend turning off real time, and then going to Editor Preferences, Edit Editor Preferences, and ticking off Show Friendly Variable Names. Turn it off, unchecked like I have it, so that you don't get variable names mixed up in the way that they are spelled. I use standard C# notation, so it may be a little bit unfamiliar, and that way you'll just know what they're actually, how they're spelled. Anyways, and open editor tabs in new window, make sure that's unchecked. I find that quite annoying, and it's nice having everything tabbed, especially with the new control tab function. And then in loading and saving, I recommend turning off autosave. It gets annoying, especially while recording. Then just hit set as default, and it's always good to just be constantly saving. I get in that habit. So a few things we need to go over first. If you go into edit project settings, if you go into maps and modes, you of course have all these settings here, but we have what's called a game instance class, and as you can see, we only have one game instance set up right now, which is the stock one. And so what a game instance is it's a manager object for, well, an instance of the game. And so one of them, a game instance object, is spawned when the game is started, and it will not be destroyed or garbage collected or anything until the game instance is actually shut down, until you close the game. And so it'll always be there. And so why this is useful is, before, when we wanted to save data, save games, things like that, and game settings in this instance, you would have to write it out to an INI config file. You'd have to create a C++ code to maybe save it to a binary file like .sav or something, transferring between levels, anytime that there wasn't persistence. But now we can use the game instance class, and it stores any data we want that can be carried between levels, and it will stay there from game start to game end, and it'll be there for you again when you start the game back up. And so the game instance is responsible for things like adding local players, adding referenced objects, creating players, debugging, getting the engine, getting the numbers of players, all sorts of things, allowing people to join the session, play replays, remove players, shut down, start game instance, start playing editor game instance, etc, etc, etc. And so it's pretty core. And so what we will be doing is using that to be doing saving. So we'll be loading and saving all of the settings that we create using the game instance. We'll also be getting into using blueprint interfaces right away. You haven't worked with them before, they're very easy to work with. They're basically just functions, and when you add them to a blueprint class, then basically you're guaranteed to have those functions in that class. and that might be similar to a function library, but a blueprint interface allows you to have extra functionality basically in each of the functions that are brought to the blueprint class through the interface. So these are usually used for interacting with multiple disparate types of objects and actors that all share some specific functionality. So you can have completely different types of objects that share one specific thing, and by creating a blueprint interface function and having your blueprint classes all implement that interface, then you can treat them as the same type and just simply call the function, instead of having a function on each of them. And so we won't be using a function library. However, we will be creating a macro library. Macros are a little bit more flexible in that way. They don't allow a return value, but they do allow you to do certain things that you can't do in functions and blueprints at this time. And we will lastly be looking at the SaveGame class and how to use it. So let's get started with those things I just described. So we can close out the project settings. I'm going to create a new folder here, and we'll call it game settings, because that is exactly what it is. I'm going to set the color to green, knowing that I'm working on it, or so that I know that I'm working on it, just a habit I've gotten into. The first person blueprint, I'm going to set that to probably an orange, because we'll be using it sometimes. So we're gonna go pure red with half green for a nice orange. Could even go a little bit darker, maybe 7.5, or sorry, 2.5. Yeah, I like that better. All right, cool. And in first person blueprint, we'll be using the blueprints. Yeah, that'll be about the only thing we're using, so we will set that to green, and we'll collapse that back out. So we have our two folders, first person blueprint, the stock one, and our new one, game settings. So let's open up game settings and let's create some folders. So I'm going to create a folder called well, this will all be blueprint based mostly, so I'm not going to make a separate blueprints folder, although you could put this in a blueprints folder in your project. I'm going to make one called, actually I'm just going to leave everything in this root folder here. So what we need first is, well, let's create an interface that I was talking about, so that we can communicate between things and call functions off it. So we'll create a no blueprint interface, and we will call this settings. Actually, I'm going to start with BPI. I've gotten in the habit of doing all my blueprint interfaces prefixed with BPI underscore, and I'm going to just go settings. You could call it my settings, game settings, configuration, whatever. And so if we open up that interface, the blueprint interface settings, it asks us to create a new function. So what we want to do is and how a lot of the core of this is going to work, the custom ones not so much, but the core video and audio will be using console commands. It's a very clever really way to use the console to our advantage to create the ability to have a full-fledged setting setup. So we just want to be able to run console commands. So I'm going to call this function we'll say set console command. So that'll allow us to basically, as if we had opened the console and typed in a command and then hit enter. That's basically what we'll be replicating here. So in this function, we need a couple things. We need an input. So I'm going to hit new here under inputs. And so we need to know what command are we going to be calling, are we going to be setting. So you can think back to Counter-Strike, like, I don't know, there's all sorts of settings. When you hit the tilde key, it'll bring up the console. So what console key are we gonna be running? So I'm gonna call this console key. So with that blueprint interface set up, you can compile and save. And so just how you would implement this is, if we go back to game settings, if we created a new blueprint, let's say we created a new pawn, let's say it was a car or something, so car BP, all we would have to do is go to class settings, and you see interfaces over here on the right hand side. Implemented interfaces, none. So if we hit the add, you'll see all the interfaces we can add, and well, there's ours, blueprint interface settings. And so now that I've added that, I can right click and I can go console, and you see we get we can call that function, and we can also send a message, set console command. You can go back and forth, sort of, as a way to think of it. And so this is under class settings is where you're going to find that. You'll see if I remove that, we can no longer call that. So anyways, we can delete that blueprint. We obviously don't need it. Next, back in our content browser, we want to right click. We want to create a blueprint class, and like I said, we're going to be using the game instance to do saves. So we're gonna type in under all classes here. We're gonna expand that menu because it's not one of the common classes. We're gonna search for SaveGame, and so that's the parent class that we want. You can see you can write all sorts of stuff to it. It needs a slot, etc., etc. So we want to select that, and we will just call this. This will be, we'll just call it settings save. Yeah, that'll work. And so you can see its parent class is SaveGame. So we won't set anything up in there yet. However, if we go back into the interface, we want to add a new function called get settings save, and so that way we can pull those settings out at any time. So we don't need an input, but we do need an output of that type. So settings save, there it is, and we will just call that settings. Perfect. So we can compile and save that. We'll keep this blueprint interface open just in case we need it. We will save it. So our entire project, Control S, so that you don't lose your work. Another thing we're going to need, like I said, we're not going to work with a blueprint function library. We're going to create a blueprint macro library. So if you right click in your content browser and go to blueprints and then blueprint macro library, we will create a new one of those. And like I said, it just has a little bit, you can do things like delays and macros, whereas functions are usually used to return stuff. And if you needed a function, usually you put it in the blueprint you need, because a function library, you can't set up variables in the standard way. So we'll create a blueprint macro library. It really doesn't matter what class you use, actor, object. Well, I guess it does, but one or the other will work. I'm just going to choose object. It has the lowest memory footprint. And we're going to call this our settings macro lib. And so we can open that up, and as you can see, it's very similar to the blueprint interface in the way it works, except we're creating macros and not functions. But we're going to leave that alone for right now. We will need that though, and we'll save. And lastly, as I pointed out in project settings, under maps and modes, we have our game instance. And so we need to create one of those so that we can use it with our settings. So basically it'll be our own version of game instance. It'll still have all the functionality of regular game instance. It's just that it'll allow us to implement our interface so that we can run console commands and such, and then save them. So to create that, we simply right-click, blueprint class, and we just type in game instance, and it's right there. And then we hit select, and we'll call this game instance is a good prefix. Sometimes people use GI, but global illumination kind of confuses me, so we'll game instance underscore settings. All right, perfect. Now with that set up, we can go into our project settings, and you'll see that we now have both of them. So we want to choose the second one, the one that has, or that will have, our settings in it through the blueprint interface. And if we open up our game instance settings, it looks just like a regular blueprint, more or less. And so we need to go to class settings, and we need to add that interface. We're going to add our BPI settings, and you see now that we get this interface get settings save over here. However, you'll notice that we don't have our other one, our run console command. The reason for that is the way blueprint interfaces work is depending on how you set them up, they work in different ways. So if I added a new function, let's just say I'm going to go input and output, and if I gave this both an input and an output, we'll just set it to like a string and an integer and compile this. So we have an input and output on this one. The get settings saves has just an output, and the set console command has just an input. And you can use ones that have just input and output in special ways. But if we compile and save that and go back to our game instance, you'll see input and output shows up. That's because it has output. However, if we right click and type in input and output, you'll see we can call that function, and we can also send a message. If we go get settings save, we can do the same thing, and console command, you can see we can also call the function and send a message. So just the same as the rest of them. The difference being that it doesn't show up here. So what I'm getting at is that we can't edit the functionality of our run console command the way it's set up. If I double click on input and output, you can see I can now add functionality to this and it becomes a basically a function in this blueprint class, our game instance. So what we need to do is, we'll delete this input and output. That's just so I could show you this example. The set console command, we just need to give it a dummy output. So we'll just go byte, since it has the lowest memory footprint, and we'll just call it dummy output. Maybe something a little shorter. We'll just call it dummy. So compile and save, and you'll notice now that they show up. So if we go to set console command, we can now actually set functionality in here. So when set console command is called, what we want to do is we want to break this connection, and we'll start building some functionality in here. We want to execute console command. So this allows us to, like I said, execute commands that you would get if you open the console with the the tilde key. You'll see if I hit play and tilde, there's all sorts of things in here that you can run. And so that's essentially how this works. And so if I typed in help here, that would be run when we called this function. And so the command we want to execute is going to be our console key. This key command doesn't really line up. Specific player doesn't matter in our instance. If it did, you could go get player controller. You could set the player index to something. You could even go to the blueprint interface and set console command. You could create a new integer, and you could go player ID if this was for multiplayer. And then in that case, you could say hook the player ID up into that, and you could possibly make it work for multiplayer that way. However, in this instance, we're not going to be using that, so I'm just going to get rid of that. But you could use it in that way. So that should, if I compile and save, that should, yeah, get rid of that. Perfect. So when we call this function in our game instance, it'll execute a command, and then it will just return. And so the first thing we need to actually build, other than going through that little example there in interfaces, is in our macro library that we didn't really get to. So the first thing we need to do is we want to basically our game settings that we created, our settings interface, we want to be able to call that through a macro. So we want to we'll go something like maybe open or get settings. And why macros are nice is if you click, I'm gonna hit new input here, you can add executions. So I could do execute, just a little trick. If you don't want the name there, you can type in execute, and you can also do another one called then, and it'll make it it'll hide the name. That way you don't need to put like a space. But you can do multiple outputs, so you can have multiple ways for the logic to flow. That's why macros can be a little bit more flexible. Instead of having a return value, you can do flow control with them in a very interesting way. But we're going to output just a regular execution, but we're also going to output our game settings. So we need to output our game settings. So what do we set that as? Settings, our settings save. So we want to get that. And where do we want to get that from? Let's give this a name first. We'll call it settings save. We want to get that from, well, our game instance. So game instance settings. We will just call this game instance. So we're gonna get our save from our game instance. So it's basically kind of like a save and load system, almost, you could think of. And so we'll use this macro to get our settings in any blueprint we want, so that blueprint knows, okay, we set the audio level to this, we set destroy all players after 10 seconds to true, and so we can use this. This is how we'll get those settings. So what we want to do is we want to take our game instance and we want to drag off of it to bring up the context menu, and then we want to cast to game instance settings. No, we want to cast to BPI. You'll see it won't show up because it's not a regular setup, but we want to cast to BPI settings, and hook up our execution wire. And as BPI settings, we want to call, put context sensitive back on, get no, that's not right. I'm gonna add a little note here so that things are easier for us. If we go back to our blueprint interface settings, under get settings save, let's give it a little description like allows a blueprint class to get the game settings. And so we'll compile and save that. And now when we go back to our macro library, as we drag off of here, we should have get settings save interface call is what we want. So we're basically calling that function from the interface. You'll see the wires are yellow. The yellow meaning an interface. And so after we get our settings save, so our save, we want to do a fidelity check. So we want to do an is valid. Make sure it's the question mark one, and hook those right in. So it's gonna check basically, is this a valid save? The settings that it outputs, the settings save reference, is that valid? Is it not pending kill, and is it a valid object? If it is, then we can simply just return out. And what do we want to return out? Well, we want to return those exact same settings out. So I'm going to drag settings over to the output there. I'm going to just clean it up a little bit by double clicking the new feature of 4.8. Create a couple rewrote nodes so that this is nice and clean. Something like so. And so if it is valid, then we just output the settings save that we got when we cast to our blueprint interface from our game instance that we input to it. So we took our game instance, we casted it into our BPI, then we did the get settings save interface call. Then we checked we're checking if it's valid, and if it is, we're outputting the settings save as settings save. Whenever we call this macro, it'll take in a game instance and it'll put out a settings save, as well as, of course, the executions in and out that we set up here. So that in itself is actually a very good description. We can select it and give it a description, and we can say takes in our game instance and returns our settings save, or saved settings save of class settings save parent class save game. Alrighty. And if it's not valid, we could do nothing. We could just return, but it's always good to have debugging, especially when you're building from scratch. So we'll print string. We'll say failed to validate settings save. Please check your work, or please report this bug, and then return to the output. It's kind of messy, but it'll work. Could bring this over if we wanted. Perfect. I like that. Alrighty, cool. So that is that. So now that we can get our settings save game from our game instance, let's go into our settings save, and let's start filling in a few things. Let's start with a custom event, add custom event. Let's call this save settings. Line it up, and what we want to do when this is called is we want to save game to slot. So we're gonna save our game essentially, and we'll give this custom event a better name than save settings. That's the name, sorry, not description. I'm thinking of functions, forgetting that. So the save game object is what we want to save. We want to save ourself, so it's going to complain that it needs the target. So let's just get a reference to self, type in self, get a reference to self. So it's saving itself essentially. No humor intended. The slot name, we need to give it a name. We can't just type in ABC123. Well, we actually probably could, but let's promote that to a variable. It'll be a string, as you can see, obviously, and let's just call it slot name. Let's go file slot name. Slot name, file name. Because it'll actually save it as a save game file in your saved folder. I'll show you that when we get there. So we'll set that up, and we'll compile, and we'll give it a default value of saved settings and user index. So again, if you had multiple users, you might have to set something up that way, but we don't. It's just for a single player game. And so the return value tells us if we, well, successfully saved or not, as you can see. So we want to create a branch, hold down B and click, connect it together, and return value to the condition. So the condition is, did we save? If true, we want to do a print string. And the string will be, we'll say settings saved, and we will just print that. Well, we'll print it to screen, and then later turn that off, and that way it'll just print to the log. And if not, well, let's just copy and paste that. If it didn't save, then settings didn't save. Please report. So we most definitely want to see the success message. So, and that should be about it. Let's see, compile. That should be good. So now that we have the ability to actually save our settings when we call that as an actual save game, parent class save game, we can go back to our macro library and we can create a new one, a new macro. We'll call it Initialize Settings. And so what this is going to do is it's going to take in the save that we created this through a string. It's going to take in the user, and of course, since it's single player, that's just going to be us. And it's also going to work through our interface to set quite a few things. But basically, it's going to allow us to initialize everything when this is called. So basically, we'll load if we need to. Otherwise, we'll create a new save game object, and then we decide whether the output takes a file that we already created and thus we load in, or if it creates a new file. So we need to separate these. There's quite a bit of logic that goes into this. So we need an input and output execution, of course. So we'll do execute, then, and we need our interface, so BPI settings, which we will call our, let's call it our settings interface. And we're gonna need to output, thusly, game settings save that game save or save game or whatever the heck. Yeah, save game. So the game save. So that will be our settings. So I'll output our settings, and we need our, remember that name we created, we need to input that as well. So a string, so this will be our, save name. All right, so from here, the first thing we want to do is do a check. And that is, does save game exist? So basically we're checking if that's there or not. If it is, then we're good. We can just load it. If not, we need to create one. So we can plug in our save name to the slot name, just the way we were just working. And it needs a user index of 0, and we could set this up again for multiple users. We could put in an integer called user index, and you could plug that right in. That way, if you wanted to call it for multiple users for multiplayer, you could do the same. You could do that as well, as we looked at in our interface or whatever before. So then we want to do a branch, because as you can see, this gives us a return value, so that's our condition, obviously. So this is basically, do we have a save game file for our settings? And so if we do, then we can print string. We can say settings found, or settings save file found, loading, something like that. You could even actually, we could cut that out. We could use the new append, well, not new, but in 4.8 it allows you to append more than one string. So we could say settings save file, and then we'll cut there with a space, and B will be the save name. We will double click here to clean this up. So it'll give us that name. We could even put quotes around it if we wanted. And then loading. Perfect. And then, so obviously, since we're loading, as the string suggests, we want to do the opposite of saving. We want to where we did the save game from, or to slot, we want to load game from slot. So put that up in there. I like these to be nicely organized. So the slot name is obviously going to be our slot name. Let's see here. How can I rewrite this? Probably go like that. Give this a little nudge down there. And we'll create another rewrote and do something like that, like all the guys are doing fancily these days. All right, perfect. And our user index that we created, we can just plug that into the user index if we want. Might bug us if we didn't have one too. I'm not sure. I've never tried without. We'll clean this up too. Do something like that, I guess. Nice and clean, perfect. And on the contrary, if the save game does not exist, we want to do the same thing basically. We want to print a string. Put this one down here. We'll say settings save file with no quotes. Actually, let's just clear this, remove pin. Settings save file not found. Go new line. Creating one. Perfect. Move that over there. Not filed. We could go a little bit deeper, like I said, now that we can add new pins. Creating one called quote, and then hook in our save name. And then quote exclamation. Perfect. All right, so with that, we can continue on. So up here, when we load the game, we want to take that save game object and we want to cast to settings save. We're taking that save game that we brought in, and we are casting it into our settings save class. And so same deal here. Basically, we'll start with the failure. So if the cast fails, you always want debug messages on casts. What we want to do is do a print string, a debug string, something like, and this output's gonna have to go way over here. Something like, and we'll use another append. We'll use a clean one, so we'll drag off and type in append. We'll say cast failed to settings save. Possible, I'm just gonna go new line here to save space. Possible corruption, creating new instance. So that'll be its alternate. And so these two are gonna work together. So what we could do is we could drag right through this print string. What we want to do is we want to create a save game object, put it in somewhere here of the class, well, the only class we really have, well, not the only one, but the one we're going to be using, settings save. And we'll bring this back a little bit. And so again, this is if it can't cast, so if it fails, it will do this. Let's see if we can clean this up a little bit and bring this over. All right, perfect. And so macro libraries, in addition to function libraries, as you can see that we have no ways of adding variables, only input and output. However, when you're calling this, what's happening is it's executing from the input to the output. And so you can do logic in between, but that variable doesn't get saved. And so that's called a local variable, and we can create these. There's a very neat, if we go into utilities, I believe, and then macro, you can see there's all sorts of stuff we can do. And we want a local integer. And so that just creates, as you can see, a local temporary integer variable. And we're going to use that for a wildcard. So we want to do a flow control using selection up here. So type or hold down S and click. Oh, sorry, that's sequence. We need select. So right click and select. And like I said, this is going to be our index, our wildcard will be our local variable. And so option 0 is going to be this save. Option 1 is going to be this one down here, but first we need to do the same thing, create the save game, and then we want to cast. So I'm just going to copy and paste that. We want to cast that save game that we created. So basically you can see if it's there, we load it and cast it. If it's not there, we create it and cast it. So so as settings save, that's option 1. So let's bring this over, clean things up. I don't like that. Try something like that maybe. And what else? Let's see here. So after we cast here, then we need to drag off of this, and we need to set, well, we only have that one so far, set the slot name, file name, and we want to set it to, you guessed it, our save name. What I'm going to do is I'm going to actually come off here. I'm going to create a reroute by typing in reroute, drag it all the way over here, put it up there, double click on it to create a reroute node, and line that up. Perfect. If the cast fails, however, we want to do a print string. Like I said, it's always good to have debugs, and just say tried casting a new save game object into settings save in initialize settings macro. Please report. Alrighty. So that's kind of our debug. And so the last thing we need to do is we need to whichever one we end up using, whether it's the one we create or the one we already have and load, we need to take it and we need to basically give it our BPI, our blueprint interface, so that we can run console commands into or so that that class can run console commands. So we need to drag off and set. Actually, we don't have that variable yet, so we need to go into settings save, and we want to create a new variable called settings BPI of the type BPI settings. And so this variable just allows us to run console commands from the save game class. compile and save our work. Make sure we Control S to save everything so we don't lose anything. Go back to our macro, and now we can drag off this return value here and set settings blueprint interface, not get set. Perfect. Okay. And so we want to set it to our input, of course. So we'll drag this all the way over right into there. Can we clean that up at all? Maybe we could just bring it up. I'll call that good enough. You won't really ever see this. I sometimes use macros to hide stuff. And this is just a library, so we won't ever really see it. And so once we set that, it goes to, finally it goes to the output, and the settings that we output is the return value. So what we're doing here is we're selecting either 0 or 1. We're setting either the one we have or the one that were created. And how we choose 0 or 1 is our local integer variable. And to do that, we need to drag off of it and type in assign. So we're assigning this local variable a value. I should fit this into here cleanly. And so what we can do is if we drag off here, we can assign it the value of 0, thus choosing option 0. And we can do the same thing, assign the variable is this one. And, oh, come on, don't give me that. Okay, we'll try this again. We'll drag off here, assign. And so this one will come right up off of here, and its value will be 1, thus giving us option 1. Looks like we'll have to move all this over to keep things clean. Cool. So and then these both go into here, so everything reaches the output. So select which save to use based on our select node flow management. All right, and this is just a debug. Create a new save. Load save. And that's about it. Perfect. So we initialize our settings, and then we can get our settings from anywhere, anytime. So I am about out of time here. So let's just go into let's create a new folder called widgets. Let's start creating our actual menu. So let's right click, where are you? User interface, widget blueprint. I append all my widgets with W underscore, and we're gonna call this, we'll go settings menu. So that'll be our main menu. Now we're gonna use widget switchers. So a widget switcher is, I don't have any examples, so I can't really show you, but allows you to switch between widgets very easily. And so we will create another widget blueprint, right click user interface, widget blueprint, widget underscore, and we'll start with video maybe next time. That's one of the easier ones. So we'll go widget video settings. So I'm running out of time, so maybe we'll set that up in the next one, and we'll start working on actually setting up video settings. We could start setting up the main one. Excuse me. Basically, it's you can design it any way you like. But we could get started here. We could throw a few together in here. We could start with a vertical box. This is going to be a variable. It'll allow us to do drag and drop. And so we will call this vertical box main or root. Well, actually root sounds better to me. Root. And under that, I'm going to put a size box. This always allows me to, if I hit size to content, this always allows me to select the width and height of something. But that's just kind of a backup that I use sometimes. So I always just put that there. You guys will know that if you've seen it in my other GUI tutorials. And then we want to put a horizontal box into the vertical box. And in that horizontal box, we want to put another vertical box. Or sorry, the first vertical box in the horizontal box. And then in that vertical box, we want to start with a spacer. Spacers are always good. Close up animations in Timelight. We won't be using that yet or at all. I went over animations in one of my other videos I think I released. And so in that vertical box, we want a spacer. And after that, spacer, we want another size box in the vertical box. Well, the first one in this vertical box. Basically, just have to follow the setup, and then the size box will start with a vertical box, followed by a size box. And this size box is going to be our video settings. And then we want to do we do it a few different ways. I'm going to stick a button right in that size box. And on top of that button, I'm going to put some text, which we're gonna set to video. Size 24 is probably a little bit small. I might bump that up to something like 28. But anyways, we'll get to that in the next video. I'm getting here on an hour, so just save everything, make sure everything's saved, file save all, save your map. And we'll get into this. I'll set that to green. We'll get into this some more in the next video in this series. So anyways, thanks for watching from the team here at Unreal Tech, a division of BlenderTech.com. If you enjoyed this video and learned something, please like it. Don't forget to subscribe for more videos. We're on social media on the links on your screen. If you disliked this video for some reason, please tell us why so we can continually improve our videos based on your community input. We also take requests, so we'll see you next time. And remember, create your way.